Hi, ladies. Welcome to episode 33 of Taking Care of Your Temple podcast. And today is the conclusion of the three-part series that I have been doing on relationships, just because there was so much material on relationships. And it's such an important part of our lives. We are all part of relationships. We are born in them, we live in them, we die in them. And if we can't figure out how to have good relationships, it's really going to affect our quality of life in a negative way. So if you are just tuning into this, you may want to go back to episodes 31 and 32, where I started this series, because I'm really not going to repeat very much of it at all. So if you want to get the full thing, go back to there and you will. All right, let me give my little introductory speech that I always say at the start of the podcast. One is that the objective of this podcast is to help women improve their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health by connecting with God regularly and using His grace, power, strength, might, wisdom, love, all of the things to improve ourselves. And there are 4 principles that I recommend for doing this. The first one is keeping our focus on God. This always sounds so incredibly easy, and it is not, because we are all highly distractible. We get sidetracked. We start chasing rabbits. So it's just a matter of continuing to pull yourself back on track, pull yourself back on track, keep your focus on God. So don't get discouraged if you feel like, why can't I do this? You can't do this because you're human and you need His help. Keep trying, keep asking for help. The second principle is we need to acknowledge that we are not enough on our own. You know, when I was younger, I thought I was a lot smarter than I think now. I thought I was a lot stronger and more capable. I've learned some hard lessons at 66 that, yeah, I can do some things, but I'm not nearly as smart or strong or capable or anything else that I used to think I was. Now, with God's help, I can do anything. I can do hard things with God's help. May not enjoy them, but I can do them. And thank goodness He is always willing to provide that help if we ask Him to do it. So I've learned to ask a lot. Third principle is to remember it is about progress, not perfection. A lot of times as women, we tend to beat ourselves up because we're not doing things perfectly. Well, guess what? That is never going to happen. And thank goodness God does not require us to be perfect, because we would all be in a pickle if that were the case. So progress, not perfection. As long as we are learning and moving forward, y'all, we're doing good. Give yourself some credit. Fourth principle, we need to work on consciously changing our thoughts, because y'all, the messages that we give ourselves, those define our reality. They determine how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we have our relationships, all those things. So if you are giving yourself a lot of toxic, I can't, it's not possible, it's too hard, whatever messages, you're not going to get very far. So you need to work on changing the messages that you are giving yourselves to helpful, healthy, empowering ones. Okay, the verse for this podcast that I found some time ago and I love is 1 Corinthians 3:16. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? I love that. So I always start each podcast with a little prayer, and I am going to go ahead and do that now. Lord, I just thank you for allowing me this platform. Thank you, Lord, for letting us learn more about relationships, because they are so important. And your Son was just such a good model for that. And we're going to talk about that today. Thank you, Lord. And I just ask that you will use this podcast to help people do better and improve their relationships. Thank you for loving us. Amen. So my goal is to do a weekly episode of this podcast. So far, so good. And give you guys some really good tools and tips that help you feel and function better. Sometimes I have guests on the podcast, sometimes I don't. This time, y'all just have me. You're welcome. So we're going to pick back up again with relationships. Last time, in episode 32, I talked about a lot of yellow and red flags in a relationship and kind of what they mean and what to do about them. I just want to say this time, if you have red flags in a relationship, you need to address them. They are not going to go away by themselves. And you need to make sure that, first of all, you're taking care of yourself and any children if you have them. And if a relationship is coming between you and your happiness, then something needs to change. So I'm going to go over some ways to address red flags in a relationship. One is to acknowledge your own needs and to give yourself permission to fill them. Y'all, if somebody is trying to keep you from your family and friends or trying to cut you off or telling you that you're not enough, that is not a good thing. And it is okay for you to realize that you have needs of your own that need to be filled. You should never have to sacrifice your own needs for someone else's. Now, I want to give a little caveat on that. Yes, occasionally you will. There is going to be some give and take. Sometimes you are putting aside what you want because someone else needs something. But if you do that all the time and your needs are never addressed, that is not a good relationship. That's what I'm referring to. Compromise is healthy, but it isn't worth it if it comes at the cost of your happiness and health. So just be aware of that. You need to figure out what you want and what you need. And don't be afraid to speak up and to be more direct about maybe things that need to change in the relationship. And that can be scary. I get that. Another thing to do, another way to approach red flags in a relationship is really to focus on communication. Y'all, communication is at the center of all healthy relationships. If you don't feel free to express how you feel, you're not going to make much progress in the relationship. Now, sometimes a partner or a friend or a family member or a coworker, they're unaware of how their actions affect you. Some people are just not very socially savvy. They don't read people well. They don't pick up those clues. So you may need to cut them a little slack, and you may need to communicate with them openly before any changes can happen. Asking for something, however, we need to be aware of this, is no guarantee that we're going to get it. But you're much more likely to get it if you ask for it than if you don't. So if you don't let these people know how their behavior is affecting you, they're probably not going to change what they're doing because it's working for them. And if they, as I said, aren't very socially aware, they may have no idea that it's really bothering you. So they're going to keep on doing whatever it is. It can be scary to ask for what you want. But if you don't ask, you don't get. Okay, another way to handle red flags is to try to avoid being overly emotional. As women, a lot of times we do tend to get emotional over these things. It's hard not to sometimes. And there's nothing wrong with having or expressing feelings. But if you get all choked up or dramatic or crying or angry or whatever, that is going to prevent you from having a discussion that can hopefully fix things or at least improve them. And then that just leaves everything up in the air and unresolved. So when you're tackling a difficult subject in your relationship, try to stay calm, even if it's really hard to do, because that can help you reach a solution quickly and effectively. So when my late husband, Ed, and I first got married, anytime we had a disagreement, I would cry. Or I would get all choked up and I couldn't talk. And it was incredibly frustrating because I'm a pretty good communicator. But if you're all choked up, you can't say anything. At least I couldn't. So I learned that if I wanted to talk to him, I would write down like bullet list, just half a page of things that I wanted to cover. And I would either use that or sometimes I would just write him a short letter. Now, we had email then, but this was before text or anything. So sometimes I would just type up just like a one-page letter and I would literally hand it to him and say, here, read this. And I felt a little silly. And he's like, why are you having me read this? And I said, because if I talk about it, I'll cry. And he's like, okay. So we did that. And then I did get better. But in the beginning, that is what I did. If it was an emotionally laden topic that I was pretty sure was going to set me off, I didn't even try to talk about it because I knew I wouldn't be able to. And writing a letter is a good alternative, or an email. Don't send a text. Emails or letters, those are good. And don't do 20 pages. Nobody wants to read 20 pages, just saying. Okay, another thing that can be helpful that you may need to do is to get some professional help. Y'all, there is only so much effort that you can put in before you need some support. If you feel like you are trying and giving, and it's just going into this bottomless pit, after a while, you don't have a whole lot left. So there are times when getting some professional help is a really good idea. A good therapist can help you figure out what's going on with you and with the relationship and can give you ideas on how to fix it. I can't tell you all, back when I was doing therapy, how many times women would come in and say, yeah, I just don't know what's going on. He'll say this or he'll do this, and I can't figure it out. And I'm, after a while, pointing out, yeah, he's a narcissist, or he's bipolar, or, I mean, I wouldn't say it like that, but I would help them to see this is not just your imagination. There really is something going on, which was hugely helpful because then they felt like, okay, I'm not imagining things. It's not just me. And I'd be like, no, you're not. Another thing that can be helpful is really learning to be honest with yourself. If you have this series of red flags with a friend, family member, partner, whatever, it's going to be really challenging to manage, especially if you are not honest with yourself. Any type of conflict resolution is much easier if everybody involved is being open and honest about how they feel. Now, how often does that happen? Not very. So start with being honest with yourself and don't back away from the truth. Sometimes we do this. We back away from the truth. We don't want to deal with it because we are afraid of where it may lead if we are truthful, which is sometimes a breakup. However, sometimes that may be the best thing to happen. So just be aware of that. Another thing that's very, very helpful is to learn to set some boundaries. Setting boundaries is hugely important in any type of human relationship, whether, again, family member, friend, significant other, coworker, neighbor. They're all important. We need boundaries to protect ourselves and to keep our relationships as healthy as possible. And we all need to learn how to state our needs, boundaries, and deal breakers with loved ones. I'm a big, huge believer in setting boundaries, setting limits. And when I was counseling people, I would give them this formula. Okay, so if you have someone in your life who's doing something that bothers you and you are not sure how to cope with it, this is what you do. You tell them, when you do or say blank, blank, I'm going to fill in an example here in a minute. It makes me feel blank, blank. So I'm asking blank. And if this does happen again, I will do blank. So here's an example filled in. When you make off-color jokes at parties, I feel ashamed and embarrassed. So I'm asking you not to do it again. If it does happen again, I will call for a ride and leave the party early. So you've told them what they're doing, how it affects you, asked for what you want, and then you've told them what will happen if you don't get it. That's a very simple formula. Now, the key here is you have to do it. If you say you're going to do something, you have to do it. And it reminds me of this funny story I heard years ago. This guy who was talking about parenting. I have no idea who it was, or I would give credit. But he said that he learned at a very early age, if his mom said something, she meant it. And what happened is they were at home and he was playing and he did something. He was like 5 years old. And he did something several times that his mother told him, stop that, stop that, stop that. Of course, he didn't. So finally she said, if you do that one more time, I'm going to throw you out the window. And he said, well, I had to do it one more time. I had to see what she would do. So he did. His mother immediately stopped what she was doing, walked over to him, picked him up, and threw him out the window. He said, now, she had made sure they were on a first floor. There was like a pile of blankets or something. So he was fine. But he realized, mom says something, yeah, she means it. If you give a consequence and you don't follow through with it, they're not going to respect it. They're just going to keep on doing what they want. So don't say that you'll do something that you are not prepared to do. Another story. Years ago, my boys were like, I don't know, 5 and 3, no, probably older, maybe 5 and 7, something like that. Driving home from a store. And y'all, I know this will astonish you, but they were bickering in the back seat. I mean, who would believe it? And they're arguing and they're going back and forth. And I told them several times to stop it because it was driving me crazy. And of course they didn't. So we're driving down the street and it's just, you know how brothers can be. And I'd had enough. I looked behind me. There was no one behind me for quite some distance. And so I slammed on my brakes and stopped. And then I turned around to the back seat and I gave them the mom glare. Y'all know what that is. And I said, if you all do not stop this right now. And I forgot what consequence I gave them. There was not a peep from them the whole rest of the way home because I got their attention. And sometimes we have to do that. But anyway, if you're giving a consequence, don't say that you're going to do something and then don't do it. One of the worst things parents do with kids is tell them you're going to be grounded for 3 months. I'm sorry. You have an angry teenager stuck at home for 3 months. Who are we punishing here? And it's not realistic. You're not going to be able to do it. So don't say something unless you know that you can follow through and are prepared to follow through. Okay, another thing that can be helpful with red flags is learning to reconnect with family and friends. A lot of times when you are in a relationship that's not healthy, one of the first things they try to do is isolate you from your support base, from your family and friends. So the more isolated you become, the harder it is to see things clearly and to look at things really objectively. So one of the things that you may need to do as you are starting to get healthier is reconnect with those family and friends. Make some phone calls, send some texts, apologize, and tell them, look, I'm really sorry that I let a relationship get sidetracked, but I'd love to get back together. Can we go for lunch? Whenever. Get those relationships reestablished. Because again, that's where you get your strength from, is from these family and friends. So another way to deal with these red flags, this is the one I'm saving for last because it's kind of scary and sad, but that is know when to leave. Not all relationships were meant to last. Not all relationships should last. So it can be a hard thing to do, but there are times when you just need to say, you know what, we're done. Now, if it's a marriage, I always suggest a separation before jumping into a divorce. Sometimes with some people, that separation is the thing that finally gets their attention, that lets them realize, okay, they really mean it. I better make some changes if I want this to last. So give them that chance. However, having said that, there are times if you're in physical danger when the only way to protect yourself and or your children is to get out and get that divorce. And along with that, you may need to get a victim's protective order, some type of restraining order. If the other person is a threat to you, you need to let other people in your life know about it so that they can have your back and they can be helping you watch out for that. Guys, if you are stuck in a relationship that drains your energy, that prevents you from growing, from doing your best or finding joy, it's not good. You're not going to grow. So you may need to gather up your courage to cut ties with that toxic individual and to focus instead on repairing your relationship with yourself and the people in your life who are healthy, supportive, and affirming. And it can be tough to do, but it's totally worth it. So I do have a story of me doing that. Years ago, when Ed was in dental school, I was friends with several of the other dental spouses. They were mostly wives, but there were a few husbands. And this one girl, we'll call her Mary, that was not her name, she and I became friends, and I really liked her. However, the problem was that, at least according to her, I mean, I still don't know if it's true or not, Mary was not in the best relationship. The marriage wasn't horrible, but it was not really good. And so she would come and she would tell me all these sad things that had happened, and it was so bad, and she felt awful, and blah, blah, blah. And then she would say, what do you think I should do? I've always been careful about giving advice. And this was way before I was a therapist and started doing therapy. But, it's hard enough for people to take advice when they ask for it, let alone when it's unsolicited. So I'm very careful about that. However, she would ask. And so I would say, I'd think about it, and I'd say, well, what if you did this? Or you could try this, or maybe that. Every time, I made a suggestion, she would respond with, yes, but that won't work because blah, blah, blah. Or, Yes, but I can't do that because blah, blah, blah. It was driving me crazy. I finally figured out years later, Mary was what we call a yes butter in therapy. Every time you gave her a suggestion, she couldn't do it. There was a reason. She had a victim mentality. It was never her fault. And there was always reasons why she couldn't do it. So she was never going to change. It was driving me nuts that here is this, seemed like an intelligent person asking for advice. I'm giving her good advice, and she finds all these reasons why she can't do it. So what I finally had to do is I cut the relationship off. I did it gradually. I just kind of started pulling back, and I was busy. I couldn't be around her. So that was, I mean, it was not like a toxic relationship in the sense that she was hurting me or anything, but I couldn't deal with it. So there may be a time when you have to end a relationship for yourself, just to take care of yourself, which is what I had to do. And, maybe nowadays I might have handled it better, but then again, maybe not. I might have ended it sooner. Who knows? Okay. So those are some things that you can do, ways to handle red flags in a relationship. Now, let's look at what Jesus said about relationships. And he actually said a lot. I don't normally do this, but I just totally copied and pasted this article, and it's from New Spring. And it's a church with 14 locations across South Carolina. And it says what Jesus really said about relationships, because it was really good. I saw no need to improve on it because they did such a good job. Okay. They start off by saying, when someone you love tells you something more than once, you tend to listen, right? I mean, if we really love them and they matter to us, it's important to that person, so it becomes important to you. It's the same way with God. When we read the Bible and we learn more about who Jesus is, we see how important relationships were and are to him. Jesus showed us the importance of relationships in the things that he said and in the way he lived his life. And I never really thought about it until I read this article, but I was like, oh yeah, they're right. So there are 8 things that Jesus showed us about relationships. One is he helped us see what's right when we are with people. When we gather with other Christians, the decisions that God wants us to make are kind of even more apparent. We see God most clearly through our relationships with other people. And let me just say, y'all, this is not always comfortable. I don't always like it, but God uses other people to show us things that we need to know all the time. All the time. 2, Jesus said, love is non-negotiable. The most important commandment that Jesus gave us is to love God, right? And then to love others. That's in Matthew 22:34-40. Healthy relationships are so important that God didn't just suggest that we treat others well, he commanded it. And the good thing for us, thankfully, is that love is not a feeling. We tend to think that, well, I don't feel loving toward them. Love is not a feeling. Love is an action. When Jesus was hanging on that cross, it was not a feeling. It was actions that he was taking that showed us he loved us. So back when I was in college, I did have an experience with this. I worked in a daycare center. I was with the 5-year-olds. And I had probably 14 or 15 5-year-old kids. And one of them, I'm going to call it Matthew. I really don't even remember his name. Matthew was very unlovable. Matthew, always had a runny nose. His hair was always a mess, needed a haircut. Clothes were dirty. He was, I don't think he was abused at all, but I think he was kind of neglected. Now, having said that, his mom was a single mother. She had like 3 or 4 other kids. She was working 2 jobs. She was doing the best she could. I wasn't, condemning her at all. But Matthew was just one of these. He would, you'd be reading a story and he'd start making comments and he'd jump up and he'd bug the other kids. And he was just not a fun kid to be around. I really didn't like him. Then God started telling me, you need to love Matthew. And I'm like, Lord, seriously? This kid is so unlovable. And he goes, yeah, and I love you. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Okay, fine. So I started figuring out, I didn't know how to do it. I could not change my feelings and just say, okay, now I love Matthew. That was not working. So I decided, okay, if I loved Matthew, what would I be doing? And I started doing those things. So I got a comb that I would keep there for him. I had Kleenex there. I would wipe his nose. I would take him to the bathroom and wash his face. I started, giving him some more attention. If he was, being really hyper, which he would do a lot, I would just pick him up and, walk around with him, or I would pull him into my lap and read a story. So I did that for a couple of weeks, and I really started changing my feelings toward him. And one day he looked at me and said, "Miss Green," because that was my maiden name, "do you like me?" And I looked at him and said, "Matthew, I love you." And I realized that I really did. God had changed my heart because I started changing my actions. So that is something that sometimes God wants us to do. There are a lot of unlovable people around. Believe me, I have met my share. I'm sure you have too. So don't feel like suddenly God's going to wave a magic wand and you just feel loving towards them. You're probably not. But if that's someone that God is bringing into your life, you may need to start acting in a loving manner because it is a psychological principle. Feelings follow actions. You act a certain way, you will start feeling that way. I promise it works. Another thing, Jesus is our role model for how to love people, right? I mean, who did it better? Jesus did everything he could to help his friends and followers know God. And we do the same thing when we're willing to do whatever it takes to help friends and family members take their next steps in their walk with Jesus. A lot of times we, or I'll say at least I, don't want to do it because it's not convenient. Jesus put up with a lot of inconvenience for our sake. And we need to be willing to do the same. Just saying. Okay, next one. Jesus told his friends not to do life alone. This is another one I had never really put together, but it's so true. Remember when Jesus sent his followers out? How did he do that? In pairs. He sent them out in pairs to share the good news that God was offering. Instead of sending them out alone, which he could have done, he made sure everybody had someone to travel and work with. So when God is telling us to take the next step, a lot of times he uses other Christians to help us along the way, whether we want him to or not. Because honestly, y'all, sometimes I have been, Lord, I know you want me to work with them, but really, honestly, I can do it alone. It's okay. I'm fine. I really don't need their help. And he's like, yes, you do. You need to work with them. I'm like, okay. Yeah. Next one, Jesus redefined family. Family is more than just biological parents, siblings, and blood relatives. Family includes other Christians too. Again, we are all part of God's family. And when we get to heaven, we will be with our whole family. Yeah, I so look forward to that. There's going to be so many amazing stories and great people that we're going to meet. It's going to be very cool. Okay, next, Jesus put others' needs before his own needs, before his own wants and his needs. After he was grieving the death of John the Baptist, Jesus had planned to go by himself somewhere quiet and spend some time alone, just probably replenishing himself. However, all these crowds followed him out to the desert, to that remote place. Instead of being angry and sending them away and said, "Hey, can I have a little privacy here?" which is probably what I would have done, he had compassion on them and he performed a miracle to feed them all. Next, kind of goes with the next one. Jesus shared meals with people. In Jesus' culture, sharing a meal with someone meant that you were no longer strangers, but you were close friends. This is why, remember Zacchaeus, the tax collector? Jesus went and ate with him in his house. Y'all, that was revolutionary because Zacchaeus was practically an untouchable. He was a tax collector. No Jews of good standing would associate with him. Jesus ate with him, basically saying, he's part of my family. Jesus extended his friendship and kindness to people far from God, to the religious leaders who thought they had God figured out, and to everybody in between, to everybody. We should do the same. Lastly, Jesus emphasized individuals over tasks. Jesus wants his followers to care for hurting and troubled people. He wants us to love the way he loved and to serve the way he served, instead of just seeing people as projects to improve. He wants us to love people personally and unconditionally because that's what he did. So he is our role model. Tough act to follow. Yes, absolutely. But aren't you glad he did it for us? Yeah, me too. So we should do it for other people. And I am preaching to myself as much as to you all. I'm not pointing fingers. I need to hear this also. I need to remember it. Okay. So a few more things. How to establish or how to nurture healthy relationships. Well, the first thing is to establish and maintain good communication. I think I talked about this before. You really need to learn to address problems honestly and quickly instead of just letting them fester. Don't avoid or ignore issues. And I will say, honestly, I may be preaching to the choir here because women, we tend to do this more. Men tend to be more of the avoiders. But there are some women who do it too. It may seem like the easiest thing to do at the time to avoid it, but it almost always comes back to bite you. The issues get worse, not better. Ed was a dentist when he was alive, and sometimes I helped out at his office. And one of the things I found is that, people come in for this cleaning, they get their teeth cleaned, have x-rays, they get the report, and he would say, okay, you've got a little one surface filling that needs to be done on this tooth. Okay, yeah, we'll get to it. They would forget all about it. They come back 2 years later. Oh, and at that time, if they had done the little one surface filling, it would have been, $90. They come back 2 years later. Now it's gotten much bigger. It's painful. It's sore. Now, instead of being a little bitty one surface filling, it's a crown. It's several $1,000s. It does not go away. Same thing with issues. They do not tend to go away. So they need to be addressed. Now, having said that, also, you do need to pick your battles. Not every issue is worth getting up in arms over. Some things you may choose to just, I'm just not going to deal with this right now. It's not that big of a deal. I will put the toilet seat down myself. Okay. Another one is spend time together in person, y'all. Liking on Facebook or other social media is not the same. Share a meal like Jesus did. Go for a walk, take a trip on a regular basis. I love this. There's a study that estimates it takes spending 40 to 60 hours together within the first 6 weeks of meeting to turn an acquaintance into a casual friend, and about 80 to 100 hours to become more than that. Y'all, it takes time. We a lot of times don't want to invest that. So really, not very surprisingly, friendships tend to form in places where people spend a lot of their time anyway: work, school, church, neighborhood, the gym, whatever. So spend time together. Next, find activities that you both enjoy and practice them together. And it can be anything: crafting, gardening, sporting events, concerts, cake decorating. Be willing to try some new things and take turns picking the activities. You may discover something new that you enjoy. And while you don't need to be joined at the hip, the relationships are going to do better if you share enjoyment of some activities together and practice them regularly. Next, learn to express appreciation. We all need to hear it. So tell them how much they mean to you verbally: card, letter, email, not a text. I don't like text because people write them too fast and they don't put everything they want. And I just think something printed out is better. Having something physical lets them pull it out and look at it again and again. So years ago, I was working with this group. I think it was a Bible study that I was leading. And one of the things I had them do is it was at the last meeting, there was a big table, and I had everybody get a sheet of paper and write their name and the date on the top, and then put the papers on the table. And what you had to do is go through and get everybody's paper except your own and write something that you like or appreciated about that person. And then at the end, I had everybody read at least a few of the comments. Well, the girls loved it. That was great. A lot of the guys were not happy, but I made them do it anyway. Can you tell I'm the oldest? I said, yes, you have to do it. So I made him do it. And one guy in particular was almost throwing a fit. I thought he was going to leave, but he finally, really reluctantly did it. So it went well. Activity was fine. A couple of years later, after that, I ran into this guy and we were chatting, and he said, I want to show you something. He opened his wallet and pulls out this tattered paper. And it was that letter that I made them do. He said, I want to apologize. I gave you so much grief over this. I did not want to do it. And I'm so glad that I did. We all need that. We need that reinforcement. We need to know things that we do well. Something else that can be helpful is help them out. If someone you care about is struggling, see what you can do to make things better. You're not going to be able to fix everything, but you can maybe bring a meal by if there's been an illness, offer to walk their dog, maybe watch their kids while they run errands. And y'all, don't ask what you can do for them. If things are totally up in the air, they're not even going to be able to think of anything to ask you to do. Just find something and do it. I heard this story years ago, don't know where, can't credit it. This man died suddenly, left a wife and I think 3 young boys. A friend of his, as a way of helping, started mowing their lawn every week in the summer. He did that for like the next 4, 5, 6 years until those boys got old enough to start doing it. Then he taught them how to do it. And then he let them do it. No, that is love. That is support and encouragement and help. That's the type of thing that we need to be doing. Something else that we can do is learn to listen. We all have times when things are falling apart, and the best thing that a friend can do is listen without judgment. Let them know you're there for them, even if you can't fix the thing, fix the situation, and you probably can't. Being present just by itself a lot of times makes us feel really useless, like this isn't worth very much, because we want to fix things, but we can't always. And a lot of times just showing up, listening, being supportive, giving a hug, that is priceless. I promise you, people appreciate it. Next is own your mistakes. You are going to make them. When you do, apologize. Let them see that you didn't mean to hurt them and are really sorry. That goes a long way. And I just want to say a quick note here. A lot of people, men especially, sorry, I'm not men bashing, but I do see a lot of men doing this. When they apologize, they say, I'm really sorry, but. You know what the but does? It invalidates everything they said before, because what they're saying is, yeah, I'm kind of sorry, but the reason I did it is because you did something that made me do it. It's really your fault. That's what a but says in an apology. Don't apologize with a but. If you're going to apologize, use an and. I am really sorry that I did that, and I'm going to make every effort not to do it again. That's an apology. I'm sorry, but not an apology. Don't do that. Next, practice compassion, forgiveness, and understanding. We all make mistakes, and unless they are happening on a regular basis, choosing to make a big deal out, choosing not to make a big deal out of it is usually the best route. And I really think this is smart because, y'all, what we give out is going to come back to us. And if we are quick to judge, and if we keep score of everything and we don't forgive, what's going to happen to us? It's not pleasant. Next, be an encourager. A lot of us, we don't see ourselves clearly, including our strong suits. So point those out to your friends, to your significant other, to your family members. They may not be aware that they are regularly kind to other people, they have a great smile, or that they always make other people feel comfortable. And those are good things to know. Next is figure out, especially in a romantic relationship, how compatible are you really? Compromise is a great thing. However, there are some things you cannot compromise on in a romantic relationship, such as children or no children. You cannot have half a child. Trust me, it does not work. Smoking or not smoking. Religion or no religion or different religion. Those also, especially if religion is very important to you, you cannot compromise on those. Or very different life goals. And what I mean by that, I've counseled these people. One person, money is the goal. Making lots of money, that is the number one thing. The other person, helping others. That's the goal. Those are just not always very compatible. So you need to kind of be aware of that. Next thing that can be really helpful is to figure out, do you have fun together regularly? And I do mean both parties. So back when I was counseling, one of the things I would ask couples, especially couples who are struggling, was, what do you all do for fun together? And do you know what the most common answer I got was? The most common answer was a blank stare. Fun? I'm supposed to be having fun? Nobody told us that. A lot of times when the relationship is in trouble, fun goes out the window. That's really a good indicator that this is not a very healthy relationship. And then lastly, do you like each other's family and friends? How often do you see them? In a romantic relationship, I always try to tell people you are not just marrying this person, you are getting their family and their friends as well. So just be aware. It's something to think about. Okay. Want to end this section with some Bible verses about relationships because there are quite a few of them. 1 Peter 4:8, above all, love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. Amen. 1 Thessalonians 5:11, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. Very important. Hebrews 10:24 and 25. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, and let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. Ephesians 4:29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Absolutely. James 1:19 and 20. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Y'all, that is such good advice, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Yeah. A few more. Ecclesiastes 4:10. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Yeah. Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And last one, Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for time of adversity. Okay, that is it on relationships. I hope this was helpful, and I'm going to move on to a few other things. I'm going to give you a few fun facts. It's usually about Waco. This time it's just about Texas in general. Okay, first one. Texas is the second largest state in the U.S. You probably guessed, if you're wondering, well, what is the largest one? Alaska. Yep. The U.S. has 10 cities, this is the next fact, with a population of over 1 million people. 3 of them are in Texas. Anyone guess what they are? I guess them. Houston has 2.3 million, San Antonio 1.5 million, and Dallas 1.3 million. Yep. Next, Texas was an independent country from 1836 to 1845. I love this. It remains the only independent country that voted to join the U.S. Oh, that was cool. Next, Texas is the state with the second highest population. The highest population state is California. Y'all probably guessed that one too. And then I kind of heard this. I didn't really know the story behind it. Juneteenth began in Texas. On June 19th, that's where Juneteenth comes from, 1865, 2 months after the end of the Civil War, a proclamation was read to the people of Galveston that officially ended slavery. African-American Texas continued to celebrate this day on Juneteenth until it became an official state holiday in 1980 and a federal holiday in 2021. Okay, that is it for today. Y'all, I hope this was helpful. I so enjoyed doing this. And along with this podcast and Waco Hypnosis Center, I am available for public speaking. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can contact me through my website, www.drmelissarich.com, or you can email me at info@drmelissarich.com. And y'all, if you love this podcast, which, why wouldn't you? I would love for you to do one or more of the following. Write me a review, give me a great, 5-star review, share the episode, or follow the podcast. I would really appreciate any of those. So I hope that everyone has a good day. You guys go out and have amazing relationships, and hope you'll be back next week. Bye.